Now, after the bloody repulse of Pickett's charge, Lee wisely pulled back the remainder of his army to the rest of Seminary Ridge and prepared for defense. He thought for sure that Meade was going to attack. And so throughout the whole day of Independence Day, July 4th, 1863, both armies just kind of stared at each other across the field they had fought for the last 3 days. And nothing came but heavy rains, which had washed away all of the blood and carnage of the battle. And so Lee decided that no attack was coming, so he decided it was safe to start moving his army. Once they were able to secure all those who were safe to be moved, the Confederate Army wound up having to leave several Confederates, including General Kemper, who was injured in Pickett's charge, behind because they were too injured to move and had to leave them behind to fall into Union hands and be taken to Union prison camps. Now, on the night of July the 4th, early into July the 5th, Lee had actually moved the entire army, and when Meade got up the morning of the 5th, the entire Confederate position was empty. And of course, Meade was under verbal attack from Halleck, and the president were saying, why didn't you go after him? Well, yes, the Union Army of the Potomac had gained its first major victory over Robert E. Lee. They did so at tremendous cost. There was upwards of 53,000 total casualties at the Battle of Gettysburg, which makes it the largest largest battle and loss of life in the entire history of the United States those 3 days. And while they had won the battle, they had suffered tremendously as well, because while 28,000 of those casualties were Confederate, the remaining were Union. So while they had won, they had been battered and bloodied just as well. And Meade knew from military experience and his time as a soldier that it's moving your army from a strong defensive position where you've been beaten up pretty good into an offensive position almost right out the gate without time to refit and reform your troops. That would have been putting his army at tremendous risk. So he did not just go charging after Lee, although he did send some cavalry and some other units after to harass the Confederates in their retreat. His army was not fit for an offensive campaign at that time. And so while the Confederates were moving back the same road that they came, at one point on the 5th, some officers decided to prepare a meal at a roadside tavern on the way there outside the town of Fairfield, and for Generals Hill and General Longstreet. Now, surprisingly, Longstreet was in a much better mood than he had been. He was actually a little bit more of his old jovial self. One of the things of being a longtime soldier, you learn to put the failures of the past behind you and just try to keep forward. And they were there enjoying a meal, and all of a sudden they hear some scuffling happening in a neighboring room. And it turns out it was the farm wife, and she came in saying, "Where's the general? Where's this great general?" She was going to give Longstreet a piece of her mind. And she came up and said, "General, your men, they're slaughtering our fat hogs. They're taking away our milk cows." Basically saying, what are you going to do about it? And Longstreet shook his head in disapproval, saying, "Yes, madam, that is sad," putting my own words. "But to see the same thing has been happening in Virginia for the last 2 years," and he left it at that. While they were very strict about how things were to be done, while they were entering Pennsylvania, now that the army had been beaten to a pulp and they were just struggling to get back across into the safety of Virginia, they didn't really push the rules as much. They kind of looked the other way when the men started taking things. And so what would be left was, whose fault was the Battle of Gettysburg? No one actually knew. I mean, people didn't know where to place the blame. Some people place it on Stuart for letting Lee march blindly into the enemy. Others blame Ewell for not taking advantage of a clear opportunity on the first day. And what happened was, there are two major figures I'm going to discuss here. One, of course, is General Longstreet, who had the largest group of men, and the other was actually General Early. After the war was over, the big thing was about getting your memoirs out there, letting people know what happened. General Early, who was in command of a division of the Second Corps, who was quite outspoken. He spoke quite freely, and he's actually the only officer who ever had the nerve to cuss in front of General Lee. And Lee referred to General Early as "my little bad man," that sort of thing. And so Early was the first one to get his memoirs out there. And he was stating about the position of Gettysburg, and everything was about, Lee didn't make mistakes, everything was fine. He believed in the infallibility of Lee. And several years after Lee died in 1870, Longstreet got his memoirs out there. He took a little bit of a different position. He went so far as to say about General Lee that he was unsteady. And he went so far on the second day to say that, that In one particular sentence, he said the battle kept going on until, quote, enough blood was shed to appease him. He spoke that way about Robert E. Lee, which in the South at that time was utter blasphemy. Everything good and everything honorable in the South for most of the next 100 and some odd years, 150 years, would be measured on how great they thought Robert E. Lee was. And for someone to speak out directly against Robert E. Lee was pure and total blasphemy. And so because of that, General Early turned on Longstreet and went after him and basically blamed the whole battle on him. Basically saying how on the second day that because Longstreet dragged his feet, he didn't make the charge like he was supposed to. And he actually went so far as to compare Longstreet's not attacking on the second day to a schoolboy who's so determined that he can't learn his lessons that he doesn't even try. That's how he compared it to Longstreet's actions on the second day. Whereas Longstreet's men had marched most of the night. They covered almost 30 miles in 10 hours. That's how fast the First Corps was marching. And if he had attacked right when Lee told him to, he would have only had McLaws. Hood's division wasn't even close to being up yet. So who's to say how that would have turned out? It's theory. No one knows for sure. But the fact that Longstreet chose to put himself on equal ground with Lee, it was viewed as blasphemy in the eyes of many Confederates and many ex-Confederates after the war, and it would actually come to his social undoing. So it's hard to say exactly where the actual fault was. I just think everything came together, one mistake after the next. It wasn't any one person who caused the Confederate shortcomings at Gettysburg. So more on that to come.